Hello all out there in YouTube, and a happy October to you all. So yes, the Halloween season is once again upon us. We have come to October, which means that I am going to do what I always do and talk about horror movies. It's almost like every day is Halloween for me. So yes, the Halloween season is now upon us, and us horror fans always look forward to this time of year. So I'm going to be doing what I have been doing for the past couple years. When October rolls around, I have been doing a ranking series. I have been counting down some of my favorite horror movies. Last year I did my 31 favorite horror movies from the 1980s. The year before that I did the 1970s. So this year we're continuing on with that by doing the 1990s. I grew up in the 90s, so that was a very nostalgic time for me. I went through elementary school and middle school at the time, met some of my best friends in middle school who also loved the horror genre, and that was a time when video rental stores were really a big thing. You had Blockbuster, you had Hollywood Video, you had some of the mom and pop stores still around, but they eventually disappeared because of the corporate video stores. But some of my fondest memories of childhood were going to the rental store, going through the horror section, and finding a bunch of movies that I could bring home and watch for that evening. I saw my very first horror movie when I was 8 years old back in the 90s, so yeah, there are a lot of memories from this time period. It was also a time when things were changing. You know, the internet was still in its infancy and still slowly becoming a thing. Not everybody had a computer, but people were slowly getting computers. You had VHS tapes slowly being replaced by DVDs. CGI was being used more in movies. You had Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park, which were major milestones in film because of how they used CGI, but you still had practical effects being used. And you had more movies being released straight to video. Because video stores were a big thing, there were a lot of movies that didn't quite make it to theaters and were released straight to the rental stores. Like anything, this list is subject to change, just like the lists I made last year and the year before are subject to change. Which brings us to the typical disclaimer that us YouTubers have to make whenever we do any kind of ranking. It's sad that we have to do this, but I say this all the time. This is just my opinion. The movies I have on this list are my personal favorite movies. Not saying they're the best movies, they're just the ones I like the most. And it is subject to change. You know, as the years go on and I see more movies or develop more of an appreciation for movies, some movies on this list will get lower, some will get higher, some will get knocked off, some will be added on. This is my favorites at this point in time. I've said this before, the opinion of some random person on the internet, their opinion on movies, doesn't really affect you. It doesn't affect you positively, it doesn't affect you negatively. You're going to watch this series and then continue loving the movies that you love. If there is a movie that is on this list that you disagree with, you don't have to put it on your list. And if there's a movie that you love that did not make this list, you can still have it on your list. And that being said, I do want to mention one honorable mention that unfortunately did not make the list this year, and that is Shatter Dead. I've been making it very clear that I've been diving into the shot-on-video horror movies, which has always been a major blind spot for me, but I've been diving into shot-on-video horror movies and enjoying some of the stuff I've seen. I watched Shatter Dead very recently and absolutely loved it. It blew me away because it's a movie, I love supporting low to no budget movies, and this is a no budget movie that's amazing what they were doing with no budget. But the reason it didn't quite make the list is because, one, I saw it very recently and I want it to sit with me a little longer before I put it on the list, and two, I want to do a review of this movie so bad, because I finally got a physical copy of it and now I can actually do a review for it. I didn't want to do a review for it so close to Halloween and then put it on the list, or have it on the list and then do a review for it after Halloween. So I figured we will not include it on the list this year. We'll do the review afterwards, so that way I'm not talking about it too much. But yes, I love that movie, and there's a very good chance it will make it on the list of my favorite 90s horror movies in the future. But that being said, let's get on with the ranking, shall we? So, sit back and relax as throughout October, we go through my 31 favorite 1990s horror movies. And so for my 31 favorite 90s horror movie, we have Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Hey Dylan, ever play Skin the Cat?
So I do love the original Nightmare on Elm Street. It's a fantastic idea, directed by the late, great Wes Craven. Such a good idea, a simple premise. If you go to sleep, you're gonna die. Now, this isn't the first horror movie. That wasn't the first horror movie to explore that idea, but it's still a very effective idea. And Freddy Krueger, of course, has become an icon. I do love the first Nightmare on Elm Street. I love the second Nightmare on Elm Street a little more than Nightmare on Elm Street 3, but Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is still good. But after we got past the first Nightmare on Elm Street and the second Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy wasn't scary anymore. But then, after the Nightmare on Elm Street series had come and gone, and we got Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, which a lot of people remember very fondly, Wes Craven came back to the series.
Miss me?
New Nightmare was essentially the prototype for Scream that you will be seeing later on this list. Sort of a meta horror movie. It follows the actors who were in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and you have this demon that's taking on the form of Freddy and trying to break into the real world. And what I appreciate about New Nightmare is it made Freddy Krueger scary again. A lot of people talk about how Freddy Krueger in New Nightmare doesn't feel like Freddy. It doesn't feel like the Freddy we've grown to know and love. And yeah, that's true, but that's because it's not Freddy. The Freddy Krueger we get in New Nightmare is not Freddy. It's a demon taking on the form of Freddy. And that's a very creative way of continuing the series without having things get too stale. And yes, there are callbacks to the original Nightmare on Elm Street series. I mean, you know, people have always talked about Easter eggs and how, you know, the member berries in current franchises. Oh, you remember this? Remember? I remember. Remember this? I remember. And Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven's New Nightmare did have those moments and callbacks to the original series, but he put an interesting spin to it. Like, there's the scene in the hospital where the babysitter gets murdered, in the same way that that Tina got killed in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, you know, dragged up the ceiling and killed up there. But what was interesting here is in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, we didn't see Freddy. We just saw Tina flying around. Whereas in New Nightmare, we saw Freddy dragging her up the ceiling, at least from the point of view of Heather Langenkamp's son. Seeing, you know, he sees Freddy dragging the babysitter up the ceiling. So it was the same thing with an interesting twist. There's no need to recommend Wes Craven's New Nightmare to any of you, because if you're a fan of horror, you've seen it. You've seen the entire Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, so there's no point in saying, hey, go check this movie out, because you already have. But out of all the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, it may not be my favorite, but it is the one I respect the most, because it did something so different while remaining true to the franchise. So plenty of people are going to be checking out Nightmare on Elm Street this Halloween, so hey, go through the whole series, and in my opinion, and in many other people's opinions, Wes Craven's New Nightmare ends the franchise on a high note. So, what else can you say? It's Wes Craven doing what Wes Craven does, which is making great horror movies.
Let's get him open. Good and proper. Cut this evil out of him.